We are chatting now with the Liberal candidate for Lambton-Kent-Middlesex, Sudit Ranade. Sudit, would you like to give our listeners and viewers a little background on yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Sudit Ranade. I've been the medical officer of health for Lambton County since 2012. And through the pandemic, I've really been working with lots of different people and organizations to help them stay prepared and safe. And really, that's when I started to think about how decisions that are made in politics are so important to our lives. And what I want to do moving forward is bring the experiences from the pandemic to help shape our future, to really make sure that we have protected systems and systems that protect us, that work for us in terms of the decisions that are made. And so that's what I'd really like to do moving forward. And I hope that you'll support me.
Excellent. We'll get to our questions. The first question: local businesses have certainly taken a hit over the last year and a half because of the pandemic. How will you support the economy, both locally and beyond?
Sure. So, in terms of local businesses, we know some sectors have been hit much worse than others, right? Tourism, hospitality, etc. So we really need to focus on the sectors that have been the hardest hit. But across the board, what we're finding is that people are saying it's very hard to find staff and employees to fill positions. So the Liberal Party has platforms related to providing training and support, providing incentives for hiring, and to have more people join the workforce and rejoin the workforce. And to retrain skilled apprentices, et cetera, right? So I really think that's a huge area that we need to focus on as we recover and rebuild from the pandemic.
All right. Our second question: keeping with the pandemic, the issue of vaccinations has become very polarizing. Do you believe vaccinations should be mandatory for any field, politicians, those working in long term care, or local businesses?
That's a really good question, and actually a question that I've thought a lot about. I think one of the challenges right now is that we are putting a very moral lens on vaccination, that either it's the right thing to do and therefore everybody needs to do it, or it's a freedom issue and you can't tell people what to do. And the truth is actually neither of those things. I think the real question we have to ask ourselves is, can we as a society afford to protect the choice of those people who choose to remain unvaccinated? And I think some very simple analyses will show us that we probably cannot afford to protect that choice anymore by virtue of what's going to happen to our healthcare system with unvaccinated people showing up with severe disease. And I think once you do that analysis, it becomes much more clear that although it's a choice we would like to protect, I think we're starting to find that we cannot afford to as a society.
Fair enough. Our next question: the discovery of unmarked graves and the horrors of Canada's residential school system have been in the spotlight the last few months and beyond. How are you personally and your party as a whole working towards reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples?
So, from the party perspective, I think certainly there have been lots of announcements made of increased funding and supports for missing and murdered women and Indigenous girls, as well as support for implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations, right? I think personally, the challenge is always one of just recognizing that there's a vast scope of information and experience and understanding that I don't have on this issue, and really being willing to really listen and stay open to the perspectives that I hear about what more needs to be done and what more we should be doing.
Fair enough. The environment has been a hot topic in Chatham-Kent and beyond. Obviously, the conversation around woodlot preservation in Chatham-Kent, flooding of our local waterways, shoreline erosion. What do you see as the most important next step in preserving our environment?
I don't think there's one answer to that question. I think it's going to change depending on who you talk to. But here's what I can tell you is that people are noticing more and more differences in what their environment is compared to what they expect that it should be, in terms of the air quality, in terms of what's happening with water and water systems and erosion, and in terms of what's happening with weather, right? And all of these things are intrinsically linked to the effect that humans have on the environment. I think the key next step is to build probably investment, right? But also build the processes that are going to allow us to have quick decisions and actions locally that are funded by local and provincial and federal efforts together.
Okay. The need for affordable housing has never been greater, especially at a time when the real estate market is going through the roof. How will you ensure that everyone in Canada is able to be safely housed and that home ownership remains an achievable goal?
So great question. I think let's put it into two perspectives, right? I think working with the federal government, there's a national homelessness prevention strategy, a national housing strategy, and if I were elected, I would have input into those discussions. So that's the role of the federal government overall. I think personally for me, it would be more about connecting the needs and the local issues that are happening to that conversation to say what's the situation of affordable housing in our suburban and rural and urban parts of the riding, and then connecting that to the strategies that we have, right? To make sure that the rural areas are not left out in that plan, to make sure that suburban and urban areas are not left out in that plan, and so forth.
Okay. The state of Michigan and Enbridge have been battling over the Line 5 pipeline for months now. On the one hand, you have environmental preservation. On the other hand, access to natural gas and saving tens of thousands of jobs. Where do you stand on Line 5?
Yeah, great question. Look, Line 5 is a critical economic and resource input to our community, right? So even though the riding is a little bit removed from the direct impacts of that, we will all feel it. And so I think it's reasonable to say that certainly in the short term, that pipeline must be maintained. I think the overarching piece, though, around like climate change and how do we move to more sustainable energy sources, et cetera, I think my view on that is you have to move fast enough to make a difference, but slowly enough that you take everyone with you. So a rapid cutoff of these kinds of things is not ideal. You need to help everyone through that transition. But in the short term, shutting down a key input to our economy like Line 5 is not a feasible option.
Okay, fair enough. And then our final question. Being in office requires collaboration. What is your current relationship with municipal and provincial reps in your riding? And how do you plan to bridge the divide between party loyalties among your constituents once elected?
Good question. I mean, working through the pandemic, I've been able to work with lots of different municipalities and they all have different needs, right? My thinking on this is communities really know what they need, and the role of provincial and federal governments is to really enable the solutions that local communities have come up with, subject to certain conditions, making sure that the money is spent according to how it's supposed to be used. But ultimately, I think communities really understand what they need, and the goal of higher levels of government should be to enable those solutions. In terms of how I would make sure that I work with people along different party lines, I think that's a really critical conversation. I think part of it is really about being able to have that conversation with people that you disagree with. Certainly, I've experienced a lot of that in the pandemic. And I think that the more you can keep doing that, I would just seek to keep doing that, right? To continue to connect with people who may disagree with you. And through that, you can get a better clarity on an issue and really hone in on what potential solutions are there.
Fair enough. Now, Sudit Ranade, please tell our voters or our listeners, potential voters, why they should be voting for you on September 20th.
Sure. I mean, look, I think there are a lot of great candidates in the field. People generally do this because they care. I'm one of those people, right? I'm really invested in the community of Lambton-Kent-Middlesex and recognizing that it's a different community all across the board. All of those communities are different. And my goal is really to work for you to fight for the things that you need to make our lives healthy and prosperous. And that's what I would do. That's what I've been doing in the pandemic. And that's what I would keep doing. And I think really the other thing is to have a relationship with you that's more long term. When I think about Rosemary when I think about Bev Shipley, when I think about the people who've represented this riding, the key was the focus on long-term relationships. And that's what I would want, to have that long-term relationship with all of you to really bring resources to our community.
Great. Dr. Ranade, the Liberal candidate for Lambton-Kent-Middlesex, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.